before we get back to the words of Jesus, I have a question for all of you, a very important question. How many of you have seen the classic 1985 movie, Back to the Future? Okay, and for any of you who weren't born yet in 1985, I want to say that movie is still a banger. It is great. And Rotten Tomatoes backs me up. It has a 92% tomato meter and an audience score of 95%. So the movie still holds up. But the movie Back to the Future is a classic time travel movie, and it has all of the challenges and conundrums associated with time travel movies. Like if you go back in the past and change something, that is going to impact the present and the future. So in this time traveling movie, we get introduced to a high school student named Marty McFly, and he gets wrapped up in this time travel experiment, and he goes back in time to when his parents were in high school. But when he goes back in time, he accidentally meets his future mom, and she develops a crush on him. And this is terrible because he needs to help her fall for his future dad so that eventually he and his siblings can exist. So all sorts of stressful comedy hijinks ensue, but one of the main problems that Marty McFly has to deal with is his future father, George McFly's fear of rejection. George McFly is afraid to ask out Lorraine, his future wife, because he's afraid she'll reject him. And he's afraid to show anyone the stories he's been writing about science fiction because he's afraid of rejection. And he's also afraid of the school bully, Biff, which actually that's legit because Biff was really super mean. But Marty McFly has to befriend his dad, help get his mom and dad back together, and do it all by the night of the high school dance. And then he has to get back into his DeLorean and go 88 miles an hour under the clock tower before it gets struck by lightning a few minutes before midnight. The stakes are high in this movie. And everything hinges on if George McFly, the future dad, can overcome his fear of rejection. Rejection is so painful to any of us. Most of us try to avoid rejection whenever we can. Being rejected by a potential romantic interest is painful. Being rejected by a college or by a potential job. Being rejected by our peers, it's painful. It feels like a jab to our self-worth. And the fear of rejection is almost as bad as rejection itself. And sometimes just the fear of rejection can stop us from doing something before we've even begun. In this sermon series called The Big Relief, we have been looking at God's grace from different angles. And so today I want to share with you that God's grace is an antidote to rejection. Rejection will happen to us, and it is always hard. With God's grace, we don't need to be defined by the rejection that we will face from time to time. God's grace for us isn't dependent on us overcoming our fears and getting our lives put back together. As a starting point, God takes rejection off the table and replaces it with God's favor for us. Our worth is defined by God's grace, not by what happens to us in life and not by what other people think about us. So whether you get the girl or not, whether you get the job or not, whether you get the approval of your peers or not, God's grace will sustain you and define you. And since God doesn't reject any of us, that means we can give God's grace to others. And here's where it gets hard. We are even asked to extend God's grace to our enemies, to people who reject us, to people who hate us or to people that we hate, to people who mistreat us, and to all of the other people who are like us and do not deserve that grace all the time. We are asked to extend that. So now let's get back to Jesus' words. Jesus says to love our enemies, to do good to those who hate us, to bless those who curse us, to pray for those who mistreat us. Love your enemies? That's so hard to swallow. It goes against everything in our human nature. Loving our enemies is not what we hear in the rhetoric all around us right now. And enemies are so easy to find in our culture today. And there's a number of reasons for that. We're more isolated from one another, even though we have technology that's supposed to connect us. We also are less trusting of one another than we have been in other times. And we are all informed by different news sources and algorithms that turn us against each other. This is really hard to overcome. And there's a lot of buzzwords that highlight our disconnection. Buzzwords like cancel culture, outrage culture, culture of contempt, and describing too many people as toxic. All these terms show how far apart we are from one another. And it makes it easier for us to think of one another as enemies. Words like toxic let us think of other people as less than human or just something that needs to be eliminated, something that needs to be gotten rid of. It takes the equality out of how we think of one another. So instead of having different worldviews or disagreeing on how we see something, we view people who disagree with us as toxic, as people who need to be defeated or eliminated. And as much as it may make us feel righteous or justified to write people off, Jesus is not on board with this. We heard words from Jesus' Sermon on the Plain, but you can also hear them from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and in many other places where Jesus is speaking to his disciples. But the headline of what Jesus is saying is not any of the following. You will not see this heading in your Bible: how to eliminate toxic people from your life. You won't find Jesus saying that. You will not find Jesus saying how to tolerate your enemies. You will not find Jesus saying how to make your enemies see things the way you do. You will not find any of these headlines before Jesus' words to his disciples or the crowds. Instead, Jesus gives us 4 action words: love, do good, bless, and pray. Now, when we look at these 4 action words, these action words are not an invitation to be a doormat to other people. These words are not an invitation to not have boundaries in our interactions with one another. And these 4 action words are not saying we have to agree with everyone. These 4 action words are things that we can do no matter what your so-called enemies do to you. These 4 action words are a relief to us because they release us from being governed by hatred or rejection or by the fear of rejection. But these action words are not easy to live. So I want to share with you 3 guiding principles that I am using to help understand and to help live into these action words that Jesus has given us. My first guiding principle is to pray for your enemies, for people who hate you, and for the people that you want to curse. This is a hard piece of advice, but it's a good first step, because by praying for people that we are struggling with, it doesn't mean we have to have loving feelings towards them. When we are praying for someone, we are entrusting them into God's hands. And God's hands are the only hands I truly trust. Prayer can change circumstances, it can change people, but most importantly, it can change me. It can change how I view someone else. And prayer doesn't deny what is happening, but it helps keep the hatred from infecting my heart. Prayer is an important first step and a guiding principle. The second guiding principle I got from a book I read recently. It's by the restaurateur Will Guidara. The book is called Unreasonable Hospitality, and he outlines his strategy for hospitality in this book. And if you're a fan of the TV show The Bear, any Bear fans? That's an intense show. I'm not going into that plot right now. But his book helped inspire that show, and he's one of the co-producers of the show. But one of his guiding principles is to make the charitable assumption about people, even when, or especially when, they aren't behaving very well. Instead of returning bad behavior with bad behavior, instead of returning hatred with hatred, he instead has us ask this question: what is going on in this person's life that they are acting in this way? Maybe this person is going through a hard divorce. Maybe they're dealing with chronic pain. Maybe they are impacted by a worldview where they have been rejected or betrayed or harmed in some way. Maybe this person needs more love and hospitality than anyone else in the room. Maybe they need to see that not everyone in the world is out to get them, and you could be that person who shows them that love or hospitality. The policy of making the charitable assumption sounds unreasonable, but so is God's grace. God's grace is unreasonable as well. Jesus tells us that God is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Any of us could be in that category at some point in our life. The third guiding principle that helps me is one that I teach to our students in the Lutheran 101 class that I teach. During this season in the new year, we have confirmation electives, and so confirmation students can sign up to learn all sorts of different things. And I always teach Lutheran 101, and a few years ago, I told Deacon Diana that my class is so amazing, every slot is always filled up every time I teach it. Kids must love learning about being Lutheran. And Diana told me that the reason my class is always full is because it's the only one that's required. Okay, so whether they want to be there or not, this is an important thing that Lutheran Christians bring to the table. We believe that each and every person is simultaneously a sinner and a saint at the same time. That means in my heart, there is capacity for goodness and kindness and compassion and generosity. And also in my heart, I can be angry, I can be bitter, I can be petty, I can be greedy. And that's all the same person with the same heart. When we realize that every single person has good and bad in them, we can never draw a line and say the good people are on this side of the line and the bad people beyond redemption are on the other side of the line. Jesus never looks at any one of us as saying that any one of us are beyond redemption. Jesus never puts us on the other side of the line, and we shouldn't do that for one another either. Jesus says, do to others as you would have them do to you. And finally, David Zoll, who wrote the book that we are loosely following for this Big Relief sermon series, says this: Jesus doles out compassion to the enemies of God, repaying scorn with mercy, contempt with amnesty, and toxicity with redemption. He doles out the big relief. This isn't easy, and it isn't fair, but neither is God's grace. But I'm so glad God keeps offering it. Thanks be to God.